Good. So, so we've seen the growing access and use of information and communication technologies (ICT), and it had a multiple impacts on gender equality and women's rights, including further exacerbation of existing forms of violence against women, especially sexual harassment and the emergence of new forms of violence, such as non-consensual image sharing. However, at the moment, we do not have an universally agreed definition and methodologies for measurement of TF-VAL for understanding the true prevalence of TF-VAL. So to fill this gap, UN Women has initiated global consultations that have resulted in a common definition for data and measurement. So, yes, thank you very much. One more time. Here are the So, see, so yeah. So as you can see, recognizing the urgency to fill this data gap, UN Women convened an expert group in November 22 as part of the joint program with WHO on VAL data to develop some common comprehensive definition of TF-VAL, which reflects the continuum of violence and the multiple drivers of violence against women. So the proposed definition was presented to the UN Statistical Commission at its 54th session and by the Commission on the Status of Women at the 67th session. And we are just basically building on this work. We published a technical report on TF-VAL now available online. And so before we report further progress on this work to the next UNSC Statistical Commission, which is scheduled March next year, we want to have a regional consultation, just like the one today. Today's panel discussion is basically organized during the 2023 meeting of the Regional Steering Group on Population and Social Statistics, convened by ESCAP, to present some of the proposed conceptual definition and status of evidence and data collection, and to share national experiences. We have two countries here presented in terms of their experience of measuring TFL with a view to raise awareness in the region and to start feeding in a mapping of existing methods and reflect on main considerations to inform the consultation frameworks for the development of globally agreed methodologies. So we have two speakers for today's discussion, and we'll be asking following questions. We'll be focusing on the following questions. Basically, the item one will be, we are mainly interested in different approaches taken by countries to collect data on TFL, whether it is from the survey or admin data or service data and so on. In terms of item two, denominator here is particularly important in surveys. We hear from the speakers on the choice of the definition of the target groups they are targeting in their data collection tools, whether it's in survey or admin data. Who are they? Who are we collecting the data from? For item three, we'll hear from the speakers of the choice of questions related, specifically related to TF VAL, including in their, which has been included in their data collection tools. So we have excellent speakers from Indonesia and the Republic of Korea. We have Ms. Andi Yantriani from Indonesia. She is the Chief Commissioner of National Commission on Violence Against Women of Indonesia. And our second speaker, we have Dr. Bong-seop Kim from the Republic of Korea. He is a research fellow from the National Information Society Agency. So without further delay, we want to ask, I want to ask the first question to Ms. Yantriani. So, Ms. Yantriani, going through your national reports, you are collecting violence against women data related to online data through various service institutions. So you're collecting that through sort of like admin data. So my question to you is that based on based on the information provided in the annual report, it is clear that Indonesian National Commission on Violence Against Women compiles TF data from various service institutions. Can you tell us the service institution from which you receive this data? Additionally, is there a national data coordination mechanism in place that fosters interinstitutional cooperation among different branches and levels of government? And how do you request the data to service institutions?
Right. Thank you. I was like, first of all, I was struck by the questions because it was in the same time something that we have been thinking for quite some times. Thank you for a moderator and also ladies and gentlemen in this consultative meeting. So allow me to first of all introduce the National Commission on Violence Against Women, because this is not a ministerial institution. It's actually one out of 4 national human rights institutions in Indonesia. And it was set up back in the 1998 in the aftermath of May 1998 riots, where sexual violence occurred during the riots in Jakarta and several other big cities in Indonesia. And by then, there are only a very few number of women's organizations as well as service providers for women victims of violence. In fact, it was the incident of 1998 that resulted in the creation of specific unit at the police station, as well as in the Supreme Court, in the courts, as well as in the prosecutor office. So when we was established back in 1998, there wasn't any such kind of data compilation at national level. We started to do this compilation back in 2001, wherein by then only around 20 organizations actually participated in it. It is with a voluntarily basis. We basically just ask them to provide us the data on cases that then being reported to them, and we learn on how they actually categorize the data. After around 5 years, we actually developed like an instrument where we divide the data according to the domains of the events, which is in the private, public, and also in the state sphere. And the cases of technology facilitated gender-based violence, or in Indonesia, we usually use the word online gender-based violence against women, was firstly recorded in 2010 after the issuance of anti-pornography law in Indonesia, in which this is a very high-profile case where an artist leaked out a videotapes of him having sexual intercourse with 2 other female artists. But the so-called the online itself was firstly mentioned in Komnas Perempuan annual reports in 2007. If you can show the first slide of my presentation, or can I just share it? Wonder.
If you have the presentation, you could share it from your end, I think, yes.
Hopefully. Can you see my screen now? It has.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Is it with the graphs?
Yes, with the graphs.
Yes.
So we have seen the dramatic increase in number of online gender-based violence against women in 2020, and mostly are reported from the service provider institutions run by the women's organizations, as well as from the police station. In fact, the police also set up a cyber unit. But we also have a different naming of the case itself. So we just at this stage we just compile whatever being named, and we are actually in the process of understanding better on the intersection of this the category itself, and actually also the continuum between the online and offline violence, including the impacts experienced by the women victims of this technology facilitated violence against women. So Komnas Perempuan's methods is actually on voluntary basis. We send out like a survey forms, and we basically send it out to service providers run by the local governments, run by community, or those that being reported to the police station, that those that being reviewed by the prosecutor office or under the indictment processes, as well as those that has been trialed and being sentenced by the courts. We do understand there is a possibility of overlapping. Indonesia is also in the process of making the so-called integrated database with IT facilitated methods, and it's actually being coordinated by the Indonesian Coordinating Ministry for Welfare. Just to answer to your question. But can I just add one thing? Specifically on gender-based violence against women, Komnas Perempuan is actually for the past 3 years in the process of coordinating with Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, as well as a consortium of service providers runs by the civil society to provide like our integrated data.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andriani, for that insights and overviewing the process. So as you can imagine, I mean, you're receiving all different source of different reported data from different institutions. You mentioned over they're mainly from police, Supreme Court, prosecutor's office, and local governments and other agencies. So you would imagine there will be a challenge of in terms of harmonizing or categorizing the categories reported by each one of these institutions. Could you elaborate a little bit further on how do you harmonize those standards, because the standards and definition might be quite different, and some of them might be reporting the similar categories. How do you coordinate and harmonize those data sources so that you publish in a one standard format?
One of the efforts was actually to use our what do you call it, citizenship number, because it's a unique number individually. That is actually the first steps in order to reduce the number of possible overlapping reports, number of reports that being documented. But on how the category, this is also another tricky questions, because each institution may actually have different definition or even different understanding, even on a specific articles. Like for instance, how we translate the law on information and electronic information and transaction. Because Komnas Perempuan will categorize it as a criminalization against women, whilst other may actually consider it as a violation of decency. So what we did was actually we hold a consultation forum. We at this stage we are still in the process of creating a common understanding on the definition and the category of acts, and how this category is actually a possible continuum of another specific acts. Just say, if you look at, if I can just show you how I make this clearer. For instance, like in Komnas Perempuan, we no longer use cyber grooming as a category, because we look at cyber grooming as a continuum of, or the first step to do, for instance, a cyber recruitment. Whilst other service providers may actually still use the term cyber grooming. We haven't really come to a consensus on this. We expect that within like a year or two, we can actually come up with a better understanding on dealing with the data being reported to our respective institutions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Antorini. Thank you for sharing that the challenges are actually harmonizing different definitions used by respective agency. So, I mean, you could imagine how difficult that is. So, in light of, in benefit of time, my last question to you is actually, so once you compile all this data, could you share some of the major findings that we could learn from in terms of the characteristics of the perpetrators or the victims? What are some of the information that you could share with us that might be insightful?
If we look at the data from 2021 and 2022, it appears that the majority of the cases are perpetrated by somebody who has intimate or at least previous intimate relationship with the victims. Very unlikely. I think it's actually more on the report that being submitted to Komnas Perempuan, yeah. So it's actually a continuum of domestic or personal level violence from online to offline, from offline to online space. And it actually creates a new tension and also a very completely different impact to the victims. We are still trying to figure out what best to accommodate the services to support the recovery of the victims who also suffer from online defamation, particularly when it actually also includes sexual content. We actually very excited for the fact that our recently issued law on sexual crime actually provided the eligibility for the rights to be forgotten. However, we also learned that it is very difficult to implement it because once it is being downloaded, despite that we try to erase it on the online platform, it can be easily just uploaded again and become a new viral. And it feels like an endless ways of dealing with the content itself. So how to empower the victims despite the viral of the content itself has become the challenge now. Besides this whole data gathering, the categorizations and other.
Thank you very much for sharing that insights. I think it's very important to know that through your efforts, data collection efforts, you have identified a challenge and problem that can be implemented through the policy efforts. So that's I congratulate for you for your data collection efforts for that. Yes. So we thank you very much for the highlights, and in light of time, we move on to please stay online because we will have some question and Q&A session towards the end of the session. So for our next second speaker, we have Dr. Bong-seok Kim from the Republic of Korea. So for you, I have a question. First of all, the Indonesian case is a good case that because it highlights how we collect the data from the admin data. But for the Korea's case, we have a dedicated survey that is dedicated to measuring the online violence, the cyber violence. So it's very well balanced, and it will give a different perspective how we can collect the TF through a dedicated survey. So my question to you is that in the Republic of Korea, the prevalence survey on VOW includes questions about online grooming. The survey on cyber violence conducted by the National Information Society Agency is unique in its focus on the questions dedicated solely, mainly to cyber violence. Could you please provide a brief overview of the rationale and the motivations behind conducting this specialized, dedicated survey?
Thank you for inviting me to this conference. My name is Bong-seok Kim. 지금부터 한국의 사이버 폭력 실태 조사와 관련돼서 말씀드리겠습니다.
From now on, I'll give you some explanations on Korea's dedicated survey on cyber violence.
한국에서는 인터넷 이용이 대중화되면서 부정적 영향의 하나로 사이버 공간에서 타인에게 폭력을 가하는 사이버 폭력이 발생하여 사회 문제가 되고 있습니다.
With the widespread use of the internet, cyber violence has emerged as a serious social issue in Korea, causing harm to others in online space.
특히 2012년 대구의 한 중학생이 사이버 폭력으로 인해 스스로 목숨을 끊는 일이 발생함으로써 이에 대한 정확한 실태와 현황을 파악하여 올바른 대책을 마련하기 위해 사이버 폭력 실태 조사를 2013년부터 실시하고 있습니다.
In 2012, a middle school student in Daegu, Korea, is online due to cyberbullying. This event pointed out the need to get an accurate picture of the current situation of online violence in Korea and take proper measures to address them. Against this backdrop, Korea has started a survey on the state of cyber violence in 2013 to collect accurate data.
2021년에는 사이버 폭력 실태 조사를 국가에서 직접 관리하는 국가 통계로 승인하여 매년 청소년과 성인을 대상으로 사이버 폭력 가피의 목격 경험, 사이버 폭력 인식, 사이버 폭력 예방 및 대응, 디지털 혐오, 디지털 성범죄 등과 관련한 내용을 조사하고 있습니다.
In 2012, the Cyber Violence Survey was officially recognized as a national statistical survey managed by the central government of Korea. Since then, we have been collecting data on the respondents' experience as a perpetrator, victim, or witness of online violence, awareness, prevention, and responses to online violence, digital hate, and online sexual crimes among both youth and adults every year.
이러한 사이버 폭력 실태 조사에서 의미하는 사이버 폭력은 인터넷, 스마트폰 등 사이버 공간에서 언어, 문자, 영상 등을 통해 타인에게 피해 혹은 불안감, 불쾌감 등을 주는 행위를 뜻합니다.
The Cyber Violence Survey defines cyber violence as any acts that cause harm or evoke feelings of anxiety or discomfort to others.
대표적인 유형으로는 사이버 언어폭력, 명예훼손, 스토킹, 성폭력, 신상정보 유출, 따돌림, 갈취, 강요 등이 있습니다.
And they give anxiety or discomfort to others through language, text, image, videos, and more in online space, such as the internet or smartphone. The common forms of cyber violence include online verbal abuse, defamation, stalking, sexual violence, disclosure of personal information, cyberbullying, exploitation, and coercion.
Thank you very much for that motivations and rationale. So we could see that it started off as a cyberbullying survey, just targeted for the young adult, the youth, but it has expanded to include the adults to a full-fledged dedicated survey. So it's quite interesting that how this has evolved through the time. Yes. So my second question to you is that, okay, in terms of the denominator problem, as in any survey, sampling methods are critical elements to consider when measuring TF-VAL. So varying denominators, such as asking all women respondents or a reduced sample of respondents that are using the internet or have access to digital technology, will produce whole different incompatible data. So for that end, what denominators did you apply? What was your reasoning, and how do you think that this impacts or could impact the results?
모집단은 크게 두 개의 집단으로 구분하여 하나는 청소년 집단이고 다른 하나는 성인 집단입니다.
The population is divided into two main groups in our survey. One is the youth group, and the other is the adult group.
먼저 청소년 집단은 전국의 초등학교 4학년부터 고등학교 3학년까지 재학 중인 학생들을 대상으로 학교 유형별, 학년별, 성별에 따라 계통 추출 방식을 적용하여 조사 대상을 선정하고 있습니다.
The youth group includes students from the 4th grade of elementary school to 3rd grade of high school nationwide. The survey participants are selected based on a systematic sampling method by the type of school, grade, and gender.
한국의 10대 인터넷 이용률은 99.5%에 달하여 거의 모든 청소년이 인터넷을 이용하고 있다고 할 수 있어 학교를 대상으로 표본을 추출하고 있습니다.
According to the survey on internet usage in Korea, 99.5% of local teenagers are internet users, indicating that nearly all adolescents in Korea using the internet across the country. So our sampling is based on schools.
성인은 전국 모든 가구 내 만 19세 이상, 만 69세 이하 가구원 중 최근 1개월 이내 1회 이상 인터넷 또는 스마트폰을 이용한 사람을 대상으로 조사하고 있습니다.
As for the adult group, the survey is conducted on individuals aged 19 to 69 years in all households across the country who have used the internet or smartphones at least once in the past month.
특히 조사 개시 전 분류형 질문으로 인터넷 이용 여부를 확인함으로써 조사 대상 여부를 확인하고 있습니다.
Before the survey begins, we ask a classification question to check the internet usage of the respondents, which helps identify the survey participants.
조사 대상은 통계청의 등록 센서스 조사구를 활용하여 시도별 가구 수를 기준으로 비례 할당하여 표본을 추출하고 있습니다.
The survey participants are selected using a proportionate allocation based on the number of households by region, such as city or province, utilizing an enumeration district of the register-based census of Statistics Korea.
최종 조사 결과는 만 19세에서 69세까지 인터넷 이용자의 시도, 성별, 연령을 적용하여 최종 추정치를 확정하고 있습니다.
As for the final survey results, final estimates are determined based on the internet users' data by region, gender, and age among individuals aged 19 to 69 years.
Thank you very much for that sharing that information. So I think this is very important because I think for any countries in the region who are conducting surveys on such a surveys on dedicated surveys, I think the denominators will be vary. I mean, so for the case of Korea, you have this screening question for the adults at least to ask them whether they have used the internet for the last month. So that will be a screening question, you know, for to define your internet users. So it'll be very interesting to observe some other countries or practices who are conducting a similar survey, whether you have what kind of criteria or definition you would have, whether you include all women or the internet users with specific criteria, such as in Korea. So thank you very much for sharing that. My last question to you is that basically, so the choice of the questions, I mean, can you tell us more about how the questions were chosen and crafted in specific to TFL or the online cyber violence in your case? If you already have lessons from the data analysis, please share them. In particular, how was it decided to focus on specific forms of TFL? Or did the survey look at the characteristics of TFL, such as perpetrators, the continuum of violence, victim, survivor, target, and so on? So I mean, the device and the means used, you know, platforms and digital spaces.
사이버 폭력의 경험 비율은 최근 1년 동안 사이버 폭력의 유형 중 하나의 유형이라도 1회 이상 경험한 적이 있는 경우를 경험 있음으로 산출하고 있습니다.
Any person who has experienced at least one of the types of cyber violence at least once over the past year was counted as a person who experienced cyber violence.
사이버 폭력 피해의 지속 기간과 관련해서는 대부분의 청소년, 성인 모두 1회에 그친 것으로 나타났으며 청소년과 성인 응답자의 2% 정도만이 1년 이상 사이버 폭력 피해가 지속된 것으로 응답했습니다.
Regarding how long they suffer from cyber violence, most youth and adults reported that it occurred only once, and only 2% of youth and adult respondents responded that they suffer longer than a year from cyber violence.
한국의 사이버 폭력의 큰 특징으로는 피해자가 가해자가 되고 가해자가 피해자가 되는 순환고리가 있다는 점입니다.
The major characteristics of cyber violence in Korea is that there is a cycle in which those who were once victims becomes perpetrators, and those who were once perpetrators becomes victims.
즉, 청소년의 경우 피해 경험자의 가해 경험은 43.9%, 가해 경험자의 피해 경험은 79.9%였으며 성인은 피해 경험자의 가해 경험 31.6%, 가해 경험자의 피해 경험은 71.5%였습니다.
So in the case of youth, 43.9% of victims were once perpetrators, and 79.9% of perpetrators were once victims. In the case of adults, 31.6% of victims were once perpetrators, and 71.5% of perpetrators were once victims.
이러한 현상은 물리적 힘이 작용하지 않는 사이버 공간의 특성을 반영한 것이며 사이버 폭력의 가해 동기에 있어서도 청소년은 다른 동기에 비해 복수심이 38.4%로 가장 높았고 성인은 스트레스 해소에 이은 두 번째인 31.9%로 나타나 사이버 폭력 가해 경험자와 피해 경험자가 서로 중복되는 결과를 초래하여 이들 경험자 모두 사이버 폭력에 취약한 것으로 확인되었습니다.
Such phenomena reflects the nature of cyberspace where physical force does not apply. When it comes to motivation for causing cyber violence, in the case of youth, the highest motivation was revenge. And for the case of adults, revenge was the second highest, marking 31.9%. The highest motivation for adults was stress relief. This indicates that both perpetrators and victims all have same motivations, confirming that both groups are vulnerable to cyber violence.
사이버 폭력 중 가장 많은 가피의 경험 유형으로는 사이버 언어 폭력이었으며 남성이 대부분의 유형에서 더 많은 가피해를 경험한 것으로 나타났으나 사이버 스토킹과 같은 유형에서는 청소년과 성인 모두 여성이 더 많은 피해를 경험한 것으로 확인되어 일부 유형에서는 여성이 사이버 폭력 피해에 취약한 것으로 확인되었습니다.
The most common type of cyber violence experienced by victims or caused by perpetrators is verbal violence in cyberspace. In most of the types, it was boys who experienced more, but in the types such as cyber stalking, female were found to experience more suffering in both youth group and adult group, indicating that in some types, women were more vulnerable compared to men.
또한 청소년의 경우 사이버 폭력 가피해 경험에서 남성의 경우 전혀 모르는 사람으로부터의 가피해가 많은데 비해 여성은 지인과 관련한 가피해 경험이 높은 것으로 확인되었으며 가피해 경로로는 남성은 온라인 게임, 여성은 문자 및 인스턴트 메시지와 SNS가 많은 부분을 차지하는 것으로 나타났습니다.
In addition, in the case of youth, for boys, it was mostly a complete stranger that they were either suffering from or perpetrating to, whereas for girls, it was mostly unacquaintances. For boys, the route was mostly via online game, whereas for girls, it was mostly via texting, messaging, or social media.
사이버 폭력 피해 후 심리 상태에서도 남성보다는 여성들이 다양한 부정적 정서를 경험하는 것으로 나타나 여성들이 사이버 폭력 피해에 더 취약한 것으로 확인되었습니다.
In terms of psychological state after suffering from cyber violence, women were found to experience a variety of negative emotions more than men, indicating that women are more vulnerable to cyber violence.
한편 디지털 성범죄와 관련해서는 청소년들의 경우 여성이 남성에 비해 더 많은 유형의 디지털 성범죄를 목격한 경험이 있는 것으로 나타났으며 온라인 공간에서 유해한 컨텐츠를 더 많이 접촉한 경험이 있는 것으로 나타났습니다.
Also regarding digital sex crimes among youth, it was found that women witness more types of digital sex crimes than men, and women experience more harmful contents in online space.
Thank you very much for sharing the details of the major findings through the survey. I mean, it's impressive that you were able to calculate the prevalence rates for either for perpetrator and also the victims, and disaggregated by sex. And it was very interesting to observe that the victims can also be the perpetrators with a higher percentage, with a high proportion. So that's a very interesting major finding from that survey. So thank you very much for sharing that research findings. At this time, I would like to invite the participants actually to post your questions in the chat box or for either one of the speakers here. So we have seen the cases of measuring the TF-VAL through an admin data sources, and also on a dedicated survey in the context of Republic of Korea. So I mean, there could be other methods and the challenges for each of the methods, I think. So we've seen challenges of harmonizing different definitions for the admin data in the case of Indonesia, but you are making an effort through the international coordination mechanism to have a harmonized, definition. In the Republic of Korea, I mean, dedicated survey for cyber violence would be very difficult because it's very resource intensive to do such a survey. But you have highlighted the rationale and the background, how it started off as a cyberbullying targeting the youth, but eventually through the political will and the support in the country, that you have expanded towards a full-fledged dedicated survey, including the nationally representative survey. So it's impressive for that effort. So do we have any questions from the participants? Please post your questions in the chat box. At the moment, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Yes, we have a question or comment, I think.
한 번씩 매년 조사하고.
Thank you for the question. The survey was conducted on an annual basis, once every year.
Okay, so the question was, Korea, what is the periodicity of conducting the survey? The survey is being conducted on an annual basis. Yes. The comment is, thank you for sharing your experience in measuring TFVAL. It's very interesting to learn about 2 cases. Could you please share what follow-up actions you have taken following your analysis? So this question can be asked to both of the speakers. So if Ms. Yantriani, would you be able to follow up on that question? Because you have already mentioned that through the findings, you have identified an issue, problem, right? So what are some of the follow-up actions that can be taken at the policy level? Or
Yeah, thank you. Allow me to, first of all, also would like to congratulate the survey in South Korea. In Indonesia, we do have the Bureau of Statistics who also perform like a survey, and I think it's very important, as being highlighted by Mr. Ingoli. It's very important to see the linkage between perpetrator and victims and how it actually be interplayed. Yeah. I think that is one of the take up that I really would like to see. Also, the situation in Indonesia, unfortunately, we don't have the data in our commission because it's actually more on the victim side, and we haven't actually expanded to actually look at how many of them also possible perpetrator in different situation. But I think we also share common common data on that. For Indonesia, in the last 2 years, sextortion is actually the majority of the cases that being reported, and also sexual harassment online. And then we also have malicious distributions, including the sexual content and also voyeurisms. And what we did with these findings, because the online or technology facilitated gender-based violence against women have been recorded since 2017, and by then we were actually in the process of advocating or endorsing the issuance of sexual crime law, which is then later back in 2022 being issued. So one of our follow-up to these findings is actually to ensure sexual violence through online or through electronic or facilitated by technology is also part of the sexual crime law. And now we are at the stage of implementing the law, and we are looking at the impacts of the victim, as I mentioned, including how to implement rights to be forgotten within our own understanding that it is very it has its particular constraint related to the fact that once it is being downloaded, everyone can actually upload it again with various platforms, and the capacity to response is not as quick as the way it is being viralized. So when it is reported, most likely it's already being spread all over the country. And it is very difficult to actually reduce the harm that being caused by the distribution of it. And we are also looking at the possibility to actually endorse the establishment of a more strengthened unit for responding cases of women at the police station, which is now under a general criminal unit, and to have the cyber unit as part of this new established, the proposed established structure, because nowadays at the police station it is handled in a different unit. So once it is an online cases, although it is a sexual crime experienced by the women or the children, it will be handled by the cyber unit, who has not the experience or training on how to deal with gender specific cases. So we are trying to actually utilize all of the information for this.
Great, thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, for Republic of Korea, Dr. Kim, could you respond briefly on some of the follow-up actions?
조사 결과를 바탕으로 예방 정책을 수립하고 있습니다.
So every year, based on the survey results, we develop preventive policies.
예를 들어 2년 전에 청소년들의 사이버 폭력에 1인 창작자, 즉 유튜버나 BJ가 부정적인 영향을 미친다는 조사 결과에 따라서 작년 올해부터 유튜버 대상의 사이버 폭력 예방 교육들을 실시하고 있습니다.
So 2 years ago, we had conducted a survey, and the survey result showed that the YouTubers, the one-person creators, such as YouTubers and VJs, they have negative impact on regarding the cyber violence, especially amongst the youth. Based on that survey result, starting this year, we are providing a dedicated training to combat and reduce cyber violence to one-person creators, such as YouTubers and VJs.
Thank you very much. We have some few questions on the chat for Indonesia. In terms of your effort to harmonization of concepts and definition, are you recommending ICCS for your data providers?
Yeah, and we're also still learning also at our institutional level. That's I type it actually in the chat box. Yeah, and I do also have a start here. One of our coordinator who is dealing with the data is who is also in this room, and she will be able to follow up the more technical details on this if it is needed.
Great, thank you very much. For Korea, we have two questions. Very quickly, question for Korea: how was the question regarding the victim to perpetrator and vice versa done? What was the question?
8가지 사이버 폭력 유형 중에서 최근 1년 동안 1회 이상 경험이 있다고 응답한 비율을 각각의 사이버 폭력 가해 경험과 피해 경험으로 산출하고 있습니다.
So there are in our survey we divide the types of cyber violence into 8 categories. So based on the respondents' experience as perpetrator or victims, based on their experience at least once during the past year, and based on that result, responses from the respondents, we divide them into either perpetrator or victim.
두 번째 질문을 답변해야 되는 거죠?
Okay, so question for Korea is that, are there any, the question is that, what is the response rate from the sample? Are there any issues of sensitivity to respond to questions of the survey? And if so, which groups tend to respond less?
일단 청소년 대상의 조사의 조사명은 사이버 폭력 실태 조사라고 하지 않고 사이버 공간에서 언어 이용 실태 조사라고 해서 조사를 하고 있습니다. 이 부분 언어 이용 실태 조사, 사이버 공간에서 언어 이용 실태 조사. 이는 이제 조사명 자체가 주는 부정적인 어휘 때문에 그런 것이고요. 질문의 순서를 가해나 피해보다는 목격 경험을 우선 물어보고 뒤에 피해 가해 순으로 물어보는 형태로 해서 질문을 하고 있습니다. 이거는 이제 질문에 대한 어떤 민감성을 고려한 부분입니다. 그리고 그룹 간의
응답률이 어떻게 나타나는지.
응답률
응답률.
가해 경험에 대한 응답률을 얘기하시죠.
전체 설문에 대해서요.
전체 설문에 대한 응답률은 일단 저희 조사 대상 목표가 학생이, 그러니까 청소년인 경우에는 9,000명입니다. 9,000명을 다 응답 질문이 모아져야 이 조사가 끝나는 것이기 때문에 따로 별도의 응답률이라는 표현은 적절하지 않는 것 같고요. 성인은 7,500가구입니다. 즉, 그 조사 대상의 숫자가 될 때까지 저희가 조사를 하는 것이기 때문에 응답률이라는 그 질문은 의미가 없다고 생각을 합니다.
So my answer to your question regarding the response rate to the survey on cyber violence in Korea, I do not think we do have a response rate because while conducting our survey on cyber violence in Korea, as for the youth group, we carry out our survey on a total of 9,000 youth. So we conduct our survey on the total of 9,000 youth, and we get response from all of them. As for the adults, we carry out our survey on cyber violence on a total of 7,500 households, and the process is basically same as we do for the young people. So that was my response for your question regarding the response rate for the survey in Korea. And in fact, the survey on cyber violence among the youth, we do not call the name of the survey as a cyber violence survey. Rather, we call it as a survey on the status of the language use in the cyberspace in order to avoid negative connotations attached to the term cyber violence. And when we ask questions in our questionnaires while carrying out our survey, we carefully arrange our questions in order to consider the sense, taking into consideration the sensitive nature of such an issue. So when we ask our questions, we start from a question asking whether they have witnessed any kind of cyber violence in their life. And then we move on to experiences as a victim, and then move on to any experience as a perpetrator.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights and your practices for this topic. In light of time, I'd like to thank the speakers once again, and thank you all for joining.